Welcome back everyone to another Hearts of Iron 4 Dev Diary overview, and this time we're going to be taking a look at free Dev Diaries. Yes, because they're small and I haven't looked at them yet, so why not? So the first one is going to be the Bag of Tricks that was released on August the 8th. This one is essentially about a few new features that they're just adding. I am guessing some of them in the patch and some of them in the DLC. So the first one is obviously faction leadership, as you can see. Now you can take over a faction if you have more than twice of the deployed manpower of the faction leader, more than 150% of their factories, and to be in every war. So yeah, you can take over factions. That's pretty good. You know, that's obviously meant for the United States in the base game, but you know, there's going to be a lot of other applications as well. So it's pretty fine, okay, if you're, you know, getting a lot bigger than the faction leader and you're actually the one that's carrying the weight, why shouldn't you have the ability to take over? That's good. They're making you pay 200 political power to take over, which is fine. And yeah, so that's pretty good. Then you can cancel focuses, and that's an interesting thing because I was under the impression that focuses were supposed to be something that you're committing to. But it seems like they just kind of forgot to add a cancel feature because they say that you know, sometimes you accidentally click that focus and realize it wasn't what you intended, or that the situation changed moments after you clicked. It doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, you can be very frustrating. So what they're saying essentially is that the reason this wasn't in the game before is because they just didn't think it would happen a lot. At least that's what they're saying. I think it used to be a consensuous decision. At least I hope it was. But no, now they're reverting that, and it's going to be a good quality of life change, of course, because, you know, a lot of the times you do click a focus and then something changes and you're like, oh shit, I wish I could, you know, go ahead and do something else. Like, you know, you're, yeah, you're getting a focus for your economy or whatever, and then out of fucking nowhere, you know, you get declared war on, and then you're like, oh shit, I wish I could change that civilian factory focus to a military factory focus or something like that. But yeah, essentially that's pretty good, and they will of course keep once you've canceled it, they will keep some of the progress, but I don't think, yeah, save a few days progress, but beyond that you won't get it all back if you change your mind. So you need to think through the choice of focus properly. It's just giving you more options, and it's good. Some focuses, like the Great Purge in the standard game, that fire off events or would otherwise break by being cancelled halfway, will still be locked in, and the tooltip will say that. So for example, the Great Purge, as you can see, it says cannot be cancelled. And then you can do Naval and Air Excercises, which is of course quite awesome. Now the first they added, let's actually get that image because that's kind of interesting. First they added experience to air wings, which makes sense, just makes sense, plain and simple. And then if you look at they're not talking about this, but they've got a tooltip with a couple of fuel tanks next to the, you know, airfield. So I'm guessing that's where you're going to see how many barrels of fuel or whatever your aircraft are actually going to be consuming, which is great. And yeah, so I'm guessing that the air training will have a chance of, you know, accidents or something. But yeah, that's going to be probably important to get your air wings ready to fight. And that's actually kind of important because, you know, the more flight hours your pilots have, generally the best they're going to perform. One of the reasons why the Soviet Air Force at the beginning of Operation Barbarossa was so outclassed by the Germans is the fact that the Germans had experienced pilots, whereas the Soviets were kind of skimping on even training the pilots that they had, and they weren't, of course, fighting wars, so they didn't have war experience. So that's kind of good to see. Then they apparently added a new repair system for ships, but they're not talking about it, so whatever. And yeah, so now they're also adding, of course, experience for ships, which already had experience, but, you know, now you can actually exercise them. And that's quite good. That's quite good. So it says, this works a lot like training your ground forces. Your forces take some damage and consume fuel while gaining experience, and also generating some global XP. Just like with land troops, exercises can only train them to a certain level. I'm guessing it's going to be regular. Experience level on ships is nothing new, but for air wings it is. A trained wing will be performing better, and losing planes means you will be losing the experience as well. I hope that there will be like a kind of trickle-back modifier that they add to planes. So for those of you that don't know, trickle-back modifier is the kind of modifier where a certain portion of your casualties is actually not people that die, it's people that get shot at and then they're, you know, healed up by your hospital. And of course, if you have field hospitals and certain technologies, that increases. So what that does is that, one, it prevents manpower losses, and two, it saves a portion of the XP from the losses. So what this would do with the planes is it would be like I guess you could say, pilot survival rate for the plane, a kind of stat that would do that, you know, kind of representing how good the plane is at making your pilot survive. And you could have technologies in the air technology tree that that improve that. For example, you know, the first one would be, I guess, just basic parachutes, you know, and then if you don't have basic parachutes research, you know, most of your pilots are going to die because, you know, a few are going to make an emergency landing or whatever, but most of the others are going to get shot down, and then you don't have a parachute, so you're screwed. But since it's probably going to be a 1918 tech, everyone's going to have it. Then you would have, you know, pilot safety construction or something, you know, so you build sturdier, more armored cockpits that, you know, protect your pilot better from injuries. That's actually something that the Americans paid a lot of attention to in building their aircraft. And yeah, the Japanese didn't. So at the end of the war, partially because of that, partially because of the policies that the Americans had with how they dealt with their experienced pilots, you know, sending them back to help train new recruits and such, you had that the Americans had much better pilots fielded than the Japanese, which led to even more favorable kill ratios when they did actually fight. You know, not just technology influences air combat, and not just, you know, vicinity to air bases. It will be up to the player to decide how much training they can afford, and this will be heavily dependent on their access to fuel, because of course it's going to be very expensive to just fly around and sail around to make exercises. Of course, experience is also gained in combat. Now, one thing that I would like to see... Now, let's check out this image. I have no idea what those two numbers are. Like, obviously one of them is the number of ships, but I have no idea what that top number is or what that bottom number is. I just don't know. Like, I try to think, what could it be? But with just two numbers, see, I was thinking that maybe it's like kinds of ships, but with just two numbers, you know, it could mean anything. So I honestly have no idea. So as you can see, yeah, the ships are training. One thing that I would like to see is the ships that are training, if they're exercised like near an enemy coast, maybe that could send events to the country saying, like, you know, enemy navy, you know, does exercises in aggressive position or whatever, and then you could send back, like, you know, ultimatums and insults, and you could have crisis pop up. Of course, it's not going to happen, but it would be awesome if it did. Like, you know, if your fleet is exercising in a sea zone particularly close to an enemy country, there could be a chance of like an incident happening or something, or that country sending protests to you. I feel like that would make sense because, you know, gunboat diplomacy is a thing. Or even if you're exercising near a minor country, because again, gunboat diplomacy, so maybe that could help you, like, get something out of that country. Like, for example, intimidation, a kind of intimidation score. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen because that's just not how Hearts of Iron 4 works, but, you know, it would be awesome. Can dream, you know, can dream. So the second one is Naval Access, which is the one that just got released on Wednesday. So this one is about the way that your ships are moving around the map, and it's kind of nice because, well, it says, with MTG, it would be possible to mark sea zones as either avoid or banned. So avoid, preferably don't go there. Banned, never go there. So a zone marked as avoid will be treated as dangerous and, well, something to avoid if possible. This goes for all ship routing. So if enemy submarines are decimating your shipping, you will be able to route it elsewhere, perhaps somewhere safer and closer to an ally. Ships will still route through a zone marked as avoid if there is no other way to get where they're going. And I'm guessing that the difference with banned is just never. Just never, 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 even if there's no other way. Yeah, okay, never mind. A banned zone won't allow moving through at all, except by manual player moves, or say if it's an invasion order triggered by the player. I definitely hope that they're going to be adding naval invasion routing. You know, that you can actually route naval invasion through somewhere and tell your transports what route to take, because it's just very, very annoying that sometimes your ships just decide to take routes that are extremely dangerous. So I just hope that that's a thing. Anyway, as you can see in the image over here, they have banned the North Sea, the British player. There is a classified thing below the infantry icons. I'm not sure what that's going to be. Not sure what that's going to be. But yeah, as you can see, there's also a fleet there. Again, with those two numbers. No idea what they're supposed to represent. So as you can see, the the naval transport order is taking a safer route, not in the North Sea. So presumably less U-boats. So that's just kind of fine. And that also works for trade routes, I think, because then they say... never mind, it's a little bit later, actually. Okay, no, and it says, it will even shut down trading if there's no other possible paths. So zone markings are shown in the naval map mode and can both be toggled directly on a strategic area alert or in the new state view for the sea. Here we also show a proper breakdown of the level of naval supremacy in the area, much like you are used to for air zones instead of a sparse tooltip. So now sea zones are a little bit more like air zones, where, as you can see, you can just pop up a little window, and in that window you can see how many ships you have, how many planes you have, how many ships the enemy has, how many planes the enemy has, and you can, of course, switch the access route there. Now, what's also kind of interesting is the fact that, as you can see, there is a there's an icon over here for the sea, and it's got some islands in there. And it's also got a weather thing. So one, weather is going to affect naval and air combat now. Well, air combat, I think it might do already. But yeah, weather is going to affect naval combat, which is great. Well, obviously it already did, but it was very derpy the way it did. So I'm hoping that they're going to be fleshing it out. And there's a classified thing, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I have no idea what it's going to be, and I don't want to speculate. Now, the reason I was saying that having that icon with the islands is actually kind of interesting is that maybe they're going to be adding naval terrain types. Now, that might sound retarded as hell, but bear with me for a second. For example, there could be a archipelago type sea. There could be an inland sea type. There could be open ocean. There could be channel. And those would all have their own, or Arctic Sea, and those would all have their own special characteristics. For example, obviously, inland seas have generally less storms and, you know, less problems with weather than the open ocean. The open ocean, however, has generally, you know, less features, whereas an archipelago stretch of sea, I'm saying archipelago just as a kind of placeholder name for whatever it could be. Like, for example, it could be the sea zone around like a bunch of atolls or something, or it could be a sea zone in between a lot of islands, such as Indonesia, where you could have I don't know, I guess higher chances of accidents and, you know, that kind of stuff, I'm thinking. And yeah, so that would be changing around how fleets behave because, for example, smaller ships perform less well, of course, in open ocean, but perhaps capital ships would have some more problems navigating in smaller waters, you know? And then, for example, you could also have sea zones that are perhaps smaller where when the ships come into contact and they actually fight, for example, on a kind of archipelago, like, you know, the Java Strait or whatever, you could have that ships start closer to each other, thus making, for example, aircraft carriers a little bit more vulnerable to things like submarines and cruisers, ambushing them in these like smaller waters. I feel like that would be great, but I also feel like that's not going to happen. Anyway, and these wouldn't be like gigantic bonuses or malices. I feel like it just would add a little bit of extra element to how you play with your navies. Anyway, so yeah, of course, at this point, I am sure you that the U-boat captains are wondering whether the enemy can just shuffle their routes constantly to avoid being located and interdicted. Changing your route will put its efficiency to 0, so if you continuously change settings, you will not be able to move supplies through the route. That said, there might be some good strategy in sometimes changing things up to make it harder for the enemy to concentrate their raiders. So obviously, if you're going to be changing your supply routes, their efficiency is going to be much lower because they have to plan out the convoy, and, you know, for a while it's just not going to be happening. So that's good. And then they have docking rights, which is just kind of like military access for just ships. Military access already lets you put ships there, and yeah, this is just a smaller version. So obviously docking rights is going to extend your naval reach and avoid troublesome paths. For example, German subs will be able to operate out of Spanish ports if their permission is granted and threaten British shipping in areas where defending them is trickier, and they won't have to pass through the channel or more guarded waters. What would be interesting is if they also added airbase usage rights. I don't know. I just feel like it would make sense. I'm not really aware of any of those. Well, China. I was about to say I'm not really that aware of any instances in World War II where, you know, someone that's kind of a neutral to them, you know, according to what the game faction system would consider as not allies. Yeah, but the problem is it's already in military access, so I don't know. And then, yeah, whatever. See, I was gonna say. No. I just went off on a tangent that leads to nowhere, because you can already do it. You know, the only countries that would be quote unquote in different factions, where, you know, airplanes from one country basing to the other actually had a big impact on war, would be China in World War II. You know, with the American planes, but yeah, I just realized that probably they're going to have access already with normal military access, so yeah, never mind. When it comes to repair and such, you will be at a lower priority than the owner of the port, thankfully, but you will also have to wait for a future dev diary on details how the new repair system functions in detail. Wow, man, repair. I hope that this is connected to a ship model damage, but I don't know, whatever. Ships on a neutral port that are there due to the docking rights cannot be attacked with aerial strikes on the base. So if you want to get rid of ships operating there, you will need to draw in the harboring nations into the war also. Now, one battle that's very interesting, and I will actually link a video about it, that's connected to this, is the Battle of the River Plate, where the Germans... It's not connecting me to Wikipedia, so it's taking forever. Where the Germans, with their Graf Spee Panzer ship, so this is like the little plan that they had, they were raiding British merchant shipping in the Atlantic, in the lower Atlantic, and then they just kind of were forced to retreat back into Uruguay. But there, in the end, it was resolved really by diplomacy rather than diplomacy and deception rather than anything else. So I wonder if, again, what would be awesome is if the diplomacy would be a little bit more fleshed out, because then you could perhaps pressure neutral countries to, I don't know, cancel agreements that they have with other countries. You can do that in other Paradox games, so I'm not sure why it would be, you know, outside of the bounds of possibility for Hearts of Iron 4 to have that as well. So, for example, if you know that the Spanish are harboring the German submarines, there should be a way to pressure Spain to stop them doing that. But again, I kind of think that there's going to be no way to do that, because who would have interesting and dynamic diplomacy in a World War II game, you know? So, here we get to the other one, which was much, earlier in July, but it's the new tags one. I've got a couple of points about this one as well, but most of it is just like, yeah, new tags, you know, just new releasables, which is fine. So this is Central Asia, of course, and, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. So that's pretty good. Then you can split up India a little bit further with Bangladesh. Now, one thing that's kind of derpy there is the fact that, as I'm sure most of you know, when the partition of India happened, Bangladesh wasn't a thing. It was part of Pakistan. It was called East Pakistan because it was, Muslim populations. And they just thought, all Indians are the same, so we're just going to divide, except for the religion, so we're just going to divide them by religion. So we're going to put the Bengalis along with the Urdus or whatever. Now, of course, they weren't thinking that simply, but yeah, not exactly the best idea, because Bengal and the rest of Pakistan is like thousands of kilometers away. And then eventually there was a civil war in Pakistan. India intervened, invaded East Pakistan, and essentially in Paradox terms, they forced the release of Bangladesh. However, that's kind of what is around. They've also added a Sri Lanka tag and Papua New Guinea. I guess, why the hell not? One thing that I'm kind of interested from this, I'm actually going to be talking about later, because there's actually a better example for what I'm talking about. So this is, as you can see, is what you can partition things with now. I'm not sure if Burma was there earlier. Was it? No, it wasn't. Wow, they didn't even have Burma. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so now you can have Burma. And yeah, that's about it. I wonder if the Chinese can take advantage of when these guys are released. I'm talking about through events, but yeah, this is just tying into my main point about these releasable tags, is that I feel like when a country is releasing another one, for any reason, whether it's the AI or a player doing it, I'm not sure if the AI ever will release countries, but I feel like there should be bad events that happen to that country and the neighbors around them due to the power vacuum that lead to kind of border conflicts, wars, because that's just how things worked in real life. So, you have, after decolonization, you have a massive amount of wars of people just trying to partition what was left behind by the big colonial powers retreating away. However, of course, the colonial powers didn't, when they subdivided these territories, have exactly the best interest of the local populations in mind. So what you end up with after the end of their presence is something that often didn't satisfy basically anyone. So you obviously see this in, for example, the Arab world and Israel and, all that stuff. So it's obviously very famous here. But you also had this in East Asia, you have it in Africa, you have it everywhere pretty much. So what I feel like should be happening is for countries that have just been released, if, for example, someone mass releases a bunch of countries, to, you know, start derping with each other. And I feel like that would make for a more interesting game. And yeah, but unfortunately, I still think that's not going to happen. And another thing that would be interesting is if you're releasing a country, and then whether or not you're playing as them or not, but it would be especially good if you're playing as them, to have like a few nation building events that get popped after the country is released. So for example, you know, are you going to establish a federal state or a centralized unitary state? And, you know, it would give different modifiers depending on what you're doing, one or the other. You know, what kind of autonomies are local communities going to have? What kind of government structure? And I guess that would be also a way to pick the ideology in a way. I don't know. That I feel like would be kind of useful. And yeah, just kind of things like that. Who are you going to look up to in both international relations and in terms of how you're going to be building up your military? I don't know. I feel like these events would add for a lot of both flavor and utility when you're starting out as a country that most likely, if you're going to be releasing and playing as one of these countries, especially in the context of something like an achievement, which I hope there's going to be achievements for these countries that are being released, probably they're not going to have a lot of flavor themselves, and they're not going to have a lot of historical events happening to them because, well, they didn't exist in real life. So, you know, except for like the Arab states that did exist very, very shortly following the end of World War II, and in the case of Syria, in some ways it existed from 1944 onwards, and Iraq, of course, existed earlier, but other than this region, all these countries only exist after the war, and so probably you're not going to have as many historical events dealing with them, but I feel like having a bigger selection of random events and a few events that are common, I guess, to every country that's just gotten released, you know, these nation-building, quote-unquote, events, I feel like that would make the experience just generally overall better. But that's just me. Again, I don't think it's gonna be part of it, and it's just kind of sad because it's gonna be left to modders to do it, and often modders just can't do things because of their resource restrictions, can't do things as professionally, seamlessly, and you know, in a way that's as well connected to the rest of the game as the developer. But hey, that's fine. That's fine. Whatever. So this is the Mediterranean area. They have 4 new tags. Kuwait. Saddam is laughing. Qatar, which owns Bahrain. So I guess there's going to be some people crying about that. United Arab Emirates. I don't know anything about the United Arab Emirates, but I'm pretty sure they were formed pretty late. When were these guys formed? I have no idea. Independence. 1966. Oh, because before it was the Trucial states, right? You know, British Arabia. Under the Raj. Yeah, I think so. I think so. Along with Yemen. Yeah, that's fine. Along with Yemen and Oman. It was just part of British Arabia. That's okay. That's okay. No matter. And then Cyprus, which is actually kind of interesting because it's another great example of these post-colonial conflicts. And it's one that strikes, I guess in a way, a little bit closer to the heart of where usually players play in Hearts of Iron 4. Because releasing Cyprus really should cause a war between Turkey and Greece. So essentially Cyprus is an island, of course, that's inhabited by both Turks and Greeks. Mostly Greeks, but also a sizable minority of Turks. Today, it's partitioned in two between the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus, which is an unrecognized but existing de facto state, and the Republic of Cyprus, which is in the south and internationally, you know, recognized, part of the European Union, part of the UN, all of that. That only happens after the 1960s. Before the 1960s, it of course was a British territory. But the native population, of course, much of them being Greeks, supported what we called enosis, which is, I guess, reunification. I'm not sure, but it's just the reunification of Cyprus to Greece, because they're just ethnic Greeks, just a little bit different than normal Greeks, I guess, in the dialect that they speak, but mostly just Greeks. So that's what they wanted. They didn't want independence for Cyprus. They wanted unity with Greece. And that's what they fought for. There was a guerrilla war, kind of low intensity, but it was there. And eventually, the independence of Cyprus was there as a compromise between the Greek pro-independence, I guess you could say, pro-reunification faction, and the Turkish secession faction that had sprung up in reply to the Greek demand for unification with Greece. Because, of course, the Turkish population did not want Cyprus to unify with Greece because they'd be part of a massive minority then. They would have preferred reunification with Turkey, but in general, they were in favor of separation. So the independence was supposed to be kind of a compromise. The compromise, however, did not last due to many, many reasons, part of them being political problems in both Greece and Turkey. But eventually, in the end, there was a kind of brief but bloody war over North Cyprus, where the Turks invaded. So if you release Cyprus in like 1936, Greece and Turkey are not part of NATO already in this timeline, because you need to remember that in the 1970s, when that war was being fought, technically Greece and Turkey were allies, and yet they were both supporting different factions within Cyprus and fighting each other. So really, Cyprus could lead to an all-out war between Turkey and Greece. So if you release Cyprus, you're going to have war between Turkey and Greece. That's just one of the ways in which I feel like the game could be a lot more dynamic in how it plays out, but it's never going to be. And wouldn't that be more interesting than just releasing Cyprus and playing as them and never getting an event in your life, about the politics of Cyprus? Because I realize that the devs of Hearts of Iron 4 can't model everything as even as good detail as something like Kaiserreich, because Kaiserreich gets a lot of details in, but they're fictional. They're very well researched, but they're still fictional politics about a fictional universe. So there's a lot of speculation involved. There's a lot of making stuff up involved. Generally, it's well researched, well thought out, and overall quite quote-unquote realistic, but it's still kind of made up. I see why the developers of Hearts of Iron 4 aren't going to want to make that much of an effort for Hearts of Iron 4 normal to have such a dynamic politics system in their regular countries. But I feel like, just like with what they're doing with Europa Universalis, and I'm guessing they did that with Crusader Kings as well, where they had a lot of different DLCs for different parts of the world that help, through new random events, through different mechanics in the politics, in the government, and the military of these different macro regions. So, like, for example, Russia, the Middle East, all of that, India, all of that. To make all these things feel different, all these different regions feel different, having unique problems to deal with, having unique institutions to work with to solve those problems and to cause problems themselves. So I feel like that would also make a lot of sense, even just in the bare minimum of ways, to make the game a little less bland, because that's the main problem with Vanilla Hearts of Iron 4, in my opinion, and the reason why I haven't played it in forever. It's because it's bland as hell, except for, like, Germany, sometimes the UK, the Soviet Union, and maybe the United States, but I've never played the United States because they're just too strong, so I feel like it would not be that interesting and not that challenging. And after the last DLC, Japan and China, those ones are relatively okay. So on the model of what they did with Japan and China, I feel like they should be expanding upon the experience of a lot of these other regions, perhaps not massively, but in some way. And yeah, I just feel like this DLC would be a great place to do it because it doesn't seem like it's going to be adding all that much for its price tag. You know, naval DLC for 20 euros. You know, it doesn't matter how much you add, still may be kind of lackluster. So an extra might just be, since they're adding so many different tags around the world and such, to add a little bit of flavor and punch to, you know, these other areas and to make them more playable. Anyway, so Central America, new countries, who cares? It's just islands. And then Africa, which is obviously the other one where having a lot of post-colonial conflicts just makes a lot of sense because guess what? That's what Africa's been doing for the past 60 years. Well, not that is a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get what I mean. So yeah, you have Rwanda, you have Tanzania, Kenya, Burundi, Uganda, all these guys. So, you know, Middle Africa 2.0. If you know my channel, you obviously know that I'm pretty much a fan of Kaiserreich, so yeah, you know, Middle Africa in there. And yeah, they've also reorganized the way the states are, which is good. And I'm guessing they're going to also be adding new resources there, maybe, who knows, I don't know, I have no idea. So this is the list of new tags for Africa. So you have all of these released, I'll show them later: Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania. You see it. It's most of the countries that actually exist in real life. So one thing that they don't have Western Sahara, which is hilarious because it's another they don't even have Mauritania. This is actually another example of post-colonial countries fighting it out. You know, Morocco and Mauritania and Western Sahara. Western Sahara, in case you don't know, is that area that's marked Spain in the map, where my cursor is sitting, if you can see the cursor. And Morocco has been fighting the locals there for, you know, a long, long time at this point, after the area got independence from Spain. Although in the beginning, that part that's south of Spain, that's Mauritania, that France there, that's Mauritania today, it's a country. And that part was also in the beginning involved in fighting Morocco there because they also claimed that area, which is kind of hilarious. In retrospective, they eventually kind of gave up. And yeah, so that's just another example of a conflict that could be happening. And it would make sense for it to be happening, but no, it's not going to happen. And yeah, another suggestion that I would have is for countries to have... also, another thing is that for some reason Zimbabwe as a country, when it should technically be Rhodesia, because, you know, for a long, long time, that was Rhodesia. Now, a lot of bad things happened in Rhodesia, and there were a lot of wars there. So that would also be an interesting country to expand. And they also decided to call the Belgian Congo Zaire, possibly to avoid you know, confusion with the Republic of Congo, which is the French one. But it's kind of weird because Zaire was kind of like the name that was put in the Congo by a kind of dictator, Mobutu. So I don't know, it was just kind of like a derpy thing. And when he was ousted, they changed the name back to Democratic Republic of the Congo. But I don't know, that's weird. Also, that's a big Somalia. There's no Somaliland, obviously. But it would be interesting to see some Somali and Ethiopian conflicts. Again, just not going to happen, but I'm just throwing ideas out there. Another thing that could be a good idea, again, just for the purpose of having more flavor to each region, is region-specific parts of a generic focus tree. So obviously there's going to be a lot of these countries are going to have a generic focus tree. In fact, probably all of them. But what would be nice is if they had a specific part of the focus tree that dealt with problems inherent to their region or macro region. Now, obviously, all of Africa having the same might be a little bit too much. Perhaps you could have the northern countries, you know, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt having like a slightly different one. But yeah, the rest of Africa, it's fine, whatever. Just have them all the same. But then you would have Arabia having a different tiny branch, or just the Middle East having a different tiny branch, and then Central Asia having a different tiny branch, and you know, kind of like I guess you could say, I don't know how to explain it in Hearts of Iron 4 terms in the base game, but yeah, I think you get the deal. It would be kind of like the warlords in China in a way, where they all have a different focus tree that's kind of different, but it would be something that's obviously smaller. So, for example, it would be if you're in Africa, it would be dealing with, I don't know, how are you going to deal with the remnants of the European colonialists? You know, are you going to try to integrate them? Are you going to try to throw them out? And there's going to be different focuses, different paths in a mini focus tree that deal with these problems. You know, with the Middle East, perhaps, how are you going to deal with foreign oil companies trying to come in here and prospect for oil? How are you going to deal with Israel if Israel exists? You know, that's kind of stuff. The legacy of the Ottoman Empire, blah, blah, blah. The Treaty of, you know, the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Treaty of Sèvres. Are you going to respect them, or are you going to try to upset it and try to, I don't know, make greater Syria? I don't know. There's just a lot of things that I feel like would be interesting. And then you could also have a unique part in Europe, you know, so that these tiny countries have better ways of integrating themselves to the European slaughter that's about to take place. But whatever, that's kind of weird. So they've changed up some states in Europe, and obviously they've remade some of the states in Poland because I guess people were angry that they could not make borders the way they wanted. They changed around Yugoslavia also, again, because people are not getting the borders that they want, which is kind of like, sometimes Hearts of Iron kind of pisses me off because they pay so much attention to, like, can we make these borders exactly historical and, like, so much more, you know, better looking and stuff. But then they don't add flavor and gameplay stuff. I don't know, whatever. So obviously now you can release Malta, as it is pronounced, Moldova, Scotland, and Wales. Now, obviously, Moldova should be causing a war between Ukraine and Romania. Well, no, maybe not really Ukraine and Romania. That's kind of a later thing. But it should be, if anyone releases Moldova, that's not Romania, of course. Romania should have options to, you know, reunify that with Romania, obviously. And Malta should probably have to deal with Italy because Malta was claimed by Italy in some ways. And Scotland and Wales, I guess it's fine. I wonder if there's going to be a lot of freedom involved with Scotland. And yeah, so the final tally of additions worldwide is, so far, 8 new provinces, 22 new states, 59 releasable tags, and a lot of province and border state border changes. So this will be in the free update. And yeah, they're trying to kind of balance this out with the UK decolonization tree, just to prevent just massive puppet swarms for the UK, which is, I guess, fine. And they saw, okay, so in addition, I saw multiple people wondering if we'll be representing semi-autonomous regions as puppets rather than integrated colony territories. This is something that hasn't been decided yet. I wonder. Okay, we'll see. And yeah, that's going to be the end. So if anyone from Paradox watched this, which they probably didn't, do these things. They're going to make the game better. And yeah, hope you enjoyed. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon. Have a good day.